Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
We are going to start in just a minute. Please say hello in the chat.
All right.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. It is 11 a.m. and that means that it is time for our live, 11 a.m. on Mondays.
Yeah, welcome to Mondays with Tara and Andre. We come here live every Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern.
Rain, snow, or otherwise.
Yeah, sometimes we do a rebroadcast of one of our best ofs, but today we are here live. And today's topic is how open relationships work.
Yeah, how do open relationships work? So we were going back and forth about the title. How do open relationships work, or how open relationships work? It sounds a bit like semantics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we jump in, we would love to ask you a question. If you had to choose a label that would describe your relationship style right now, what would that be?
Yeah.
So drop it in the chat. We'd love to, some people have a really hard time with labels, but sometimes it's important to...
That's what I was going to say, right? Some people protest labels like, oh, I don't like to use a label, but at the same time, they are descriptors that might inform us as to where we're at or what's going on. And maybe we do it with a little asterisk and say, well, I use this label now to kind of inform you, but maybe it's not 100% of who I am, or perhaps it's who I was yesterday. May it be who I am tomorrow? We don't know. But we'll use labels to kind of just give us an idea of where we are in the woods.
Yeah, it gives you, I think, a starting point. So I don't love labels either, but if you did have to choose one, what would it be? So you can drop that in the chat. But we are going to, if you don't know what it is, it's perfect timing, because today we're going to talk about how open relationships work, but more specifically, we're going to break down the different main categories of non-monogamy, and perhaps you can see then which one fits best for you, or what combination of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah, so from being monogamish to swinging, polyamory,
anarchist,
and relationship anarchist, and more. So we'll share some definitions, but stay to the end as we have something very special to share with you. And speaking of something special, we have an awesome worksheet this week to share with you, which has the questions that we're going to go over today to determine what style you might like to have.
It'll be on the test.
It'll be on the test.
So the answers will be on the test.
The answers will not be on the test. It's a worksheet. It's a worksheet that people could fill in their answers to help them come to what it is, what style of open relationship, open relating, or non-monogamy that they're most interested in.
So there's no right or wrong answers. It's just how you are. Where do you see yourself today?
Yeah, it's a starting point. So if you do want that worksheet, please drop the word work or work, W-E-R-K or W-O-R-K, in the chat, and we'll make sure we send it to you after the broadcast.
Maybe this could be fun work.
It is fun work.
Yeah, it is fun work. Yeah, talking about sex and relationships is always fun.
Yeah, and just understanding what it is you want in your relationships, I think, is great too. And then you have something to share with others and talk about, a starting point. So.
Yeah, so you might figure out what it is you're wanting by doing this workshop.
Yeah.
It'll give you some clarity.
Yeah, so that's what we're here to do. But if you're not clear, we're always here. You can reach out to chat with us, and we can work through these questions and stuff with you.
Sure. And not knowing is perfectly okay too, right?
Yeah, of course. You don't have to know. And I think sometimes people get really hung up with the fact that you have to come up with a particular label and you have to do it right. But I think the only right way
is by communicating.
And the only right way is the right way for you.
Well, okay, there's that too. But communicate whatever is the right way for you. But, it makes me think of, the idea of having to know your identity, for example. People want to know. So what are you? Are you like straight, or you're bi, or you're gay? Or people often want to know, right?
Yeah.
And maybe we're reluctant to put the labels upon ourselves, but it might also, kind of feed where the other person is. They want to know. They want to know, are they in the right neck of the woods, or they're curious about you, whatever the reasoning is. It is tempting to put a name or a label to it, even if we might not want to necessarily always adhere to that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting you talk about identity, because for me, my relational identity, how I do relationships, is part of my identity.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's what we used to call it in the G-cert, right? So the G-cert, there's many different components to make up who we are, right? So you may have your sexual expression, your sexual identity, all those different things, your relating styles, and this is one of those components. It's on a spectrum, right? And it may be static or it may be plastic. We may change over time.
Yes.
Or may change in circumstances or who we're with, all those good things. So we'll look at it and see where we identify and where we've been with that and where we're not. But there's a lot of ground to cover. So Andre, let's get to it.
Well, I just was going to make one more point.
I could feel it.
Well, because you did say, all your different identities. And this is where I think it's interesting, because as leading up to Pride in June, we talked about this topic, which is in the guides, because there's some people that feel that relational identities don't need to be represented in Pride. And I don't want to go into detail in it, but there is a talk on that very thing. So
yeah, it's worth checking out. And some people get really heated about it too, right?
Oh, they do.
Oh,
They do. Okay, well, let's jump into the different kind of styles of relating in non-monogamy, or in all relationships, actually. So you may have seen this diagram before. This is adapted from Jessica Fern's Polysecure, which is a great book if you're wanting to learn about polyamory and attachment and that sort of thing. It's a great resource for that.
Yeah, from amateur, somebody who's just curious about it, to somebody who's a so-called sexpert, right?
Yeah.
There's always something to learn.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I love the book. I know some people, it's a little more complex than they want to. So this is why we do these talks, to help break things down.
But it's still fairly an easy read. I mean, it's digestible. So check it out. It's a good book.
Okay, so we're going to jump into these different styles. But first, we're going to ask you another question. Do you like having a label to your relationship style? So put a 1 for yes, 2 for no, and 3 for it depends.
What if I go back and forth? What if it's like my other aspects of my life that are not so fixed? Maybe sometimes I like having a label and other times I hate it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'd like to know what people think.
Yeah,
so
drop us a line.
We'll go back, drop us a line, put your comments in. But so here's that diagram. And if you've seen this before, you may be familiar with it. For those who are not as familiar, it's just a way of showing, the different types of categories, let's say general categories. And I think we need to say general, and we're really generalizing here in terms of the definitions, where some of the different relating styles fit in terms of being sexually high sexual exclusivity to lower sexual exclusivity, and then high emotional exclusivity to low emotional exclusivity. So they're organized in quadrants. So we're going to talk about the upper left-hand quadrant, which is the ones that are more higher in sexual exclusivity and emotional exclusivity. And emotional exclusivity. So,
but I want to say also to this, it's a great graph because there's no absolute boundary there, but also to that point, a lot of these, if you looked at them as though they were circles or kind of spectrums, they might bleed into the other one, right? So maybe they're not so absolute in their presentation.
No, exactly. Oh, I'm looking and seeing in the comments that some people are putting some definitions. Awesome. Oh, and somebody wants the worksheet. Okay.
1s and 2s.
So let's go in. So that upper left-hand quadrant. So monogamy. So I think this is something people are familiar with.
Are people booing? No, let's not boo the monogamous.
Oh, so some people like labels and some people don't. That's interesting. So monogamy. So I think most of us know what this is. It's usually when there's two people in a coupled situation or partnered situation where they're exclusive. So sexually and emotionally.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Culturally, it's often considered the standard, right? It is the norm that we will couple in hetero ways and be monogamous together.
Well, even people that are in non-heterosexual relationships can be monogamous. So I don't think it's limited to heterosexual.
No, I'm just saying the standard of being in this couple, this two-person relationship, is often seen as a standard, regardless of hetero or otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. But in this case, people are sexually and emotionally, anything outside of that relationship is considered as cheating or just being disloyal.
Well, it's often referred to also as a closed relationship, right? So it's closed to any type of sexual, emotional interactions with other people.
Yeah. And I think that's where sometimes things get blurry, because some people have different also definitions of what is considered still within monogamy. Like if you have friends of the opposite sex or the same gender, if you partner with the same gender. So there's some interesting things around that where monogamy can get into a slippery slope.
Yeah. So like, you and I are very conventional that way, and we're very monogamous. We're in a closed relationship sexually and emotionally, but yet we have bridge partners that we play with all the time, and we love them and they love us, and we support each other in so many ways. So when does it become emotional cheating? When does it become, taboo or restricted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Forsaking all others.
I think when there's secrets involved, when you don't tell people, what your connection is.
So what if it's really open then? You really see that I love James. When we come to play bridge with him, I'm really invested in spending a lot of good quality emotional time. It's open. Everybody sees that we really like each other. We're great friends.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it depends, I think if it's out in the...
I'm laughing because our producers told me to.
Yes, because we have a lot of content today, so I want to kind of skirt through these things. So from monogamy, moving towards monogamish.
A little bit easier, right? A little bit starting to open up a little bit.
Opening up
in some areas, perhaps.
Yeah, so you might have some special situations where you might engage sexually or emotionally more deeply with other people.
So we're going on vacation, the neighbors won't see it, our community doesn't know it. Now it's permissive. We go out there and we do this as a one-time off kind of deal. Like, let's have a little fun on vacation.
Yeah,
that's one example.
Exactly.
So it's kind of, we're still in a monogamous model, but we're monogamish in that we've loosened some of the boundaries.
Exactly.
Some restrictions. Okay.
Now, in the same...
Emotionally and sexually.
Emotionally and sexually, both, whatever.
So
the other one that fits into this category, which people may not be as familiar with, is polyfidelity.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know what polyfidelity is?
No, why don't you tell us?
Polyfidelity is when it's a relationship that involves more than two people, but there is some sort of exclusivity around it. So for example, that excludes outside partners. So you may be in a triad or a throuple, as people call it. I don't like that term.
You don't like that term?
No, because it assumes that it's a couple with an added. So that's why I like triad. Really? Yeah, to me, that's the origin of throuple, that there's a couple and a third.
No, I saw it as a blend of the three of us making what would be otherwise a couple. We're now a trouble.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. See, I think people have different.
I like
triad
perfect.
Better.
But isn't it great that we're talking about this and talking about these labels and what do I understand of label and what do you understand of it? Right.
Yeah.
So it's good to know.
No, I'm interested to hear actually what people think about those two words because I think it's controversial. And I'm just realizing we're talking really fast and there are usually closed captions, so we probably should talk a little slower. Okay. But we do have a lot of content.
We do.
But polyfidelity is when you might have multiple partners, but it's a more closed situation where you're exclusive to each other. So sometimes people have, for example, a closed polycule. So there may be two couples or four people or three people or a triad, whatever, but it's closed. There's no outside relationship.
Would you also say that one of the other components of that is that everybody's in agreement with this, that is all understood that we are in this together and that we are fidel to each other, that we are not going outside of this?
Yeah, I mean, in ideal situations, right? But some people would say that they may be in a closed polycule where they don't want to be, that it feels more required of them to participate. So this is what happens sometimes that people have more hierarchical relationships, or if there is a triad, sometimes if there's an existing couple base and it's a closed relationship, it can feel like it's put upon you. But that's where consent and all those other conversations and knowing what you want comes in place.
I thought you were going to mention something about having couples privilege in that.
I was going to talk about that in polyamory.
Okay, we'll talk it later.
You said it now, so maybe we need to say it.
But it's something that you often bring up. I think you are hyper aware of the idea that we should guard against
couples privilege.
So can you tell us briefly what couples privilege is then?
Well, I'll try not to mess up the definition, but generally the idea of couples privilege is where, say you're in a couple situation. So say you and I are in a relationship together and it's more of a hierarchical relationship. So there's a leveled importance that we make decisions as a couple that impact other people that we're partners with without sort of their consent. So there's an imbalance of power. So that's what the term couples privilege is often used. If somebody has a better definition, but that's my general definition. So that can sometimes happen in a situation where it's a closed triad, for example. So somebody is joining the couple. So this is where unicorn hunting and all that stuff comes in. People think if you're looking for a single person to join you, that you may be exhibiting couples privilege.
Well said.
Okay. So let's move on to the next quadrant.
Swinging.
Yeah, so the lower where it's moving towards more being multiple amorous, polyamorous, and there's varying levels of exclusivity. So in the
swinging, you may be monoamorous, right? You may still have that one kind of primary partner or one person that you are highly emotionally connected to, and then engage in other activities outside of that, usually with them.
Yeah, the idea of swinging, and like, again, people do this very differently. So this is why we're really generalizing here, is like you said, you're in a coupled situation and you may go out, you may go and go to events or parties or clubs and that sort of thing, where you get involved with multiple people, but there's not the same emotional connection with them. So you're not creating ongoing relationships with them.
So you're physically or sexually interacting with them, usually during that type of event, but otherwise you're kind of coupled with your emotional partner otherwise.
Yeah, and people who consider themselves more swingers or lifestyle or libertine, they usually have that primary relationship and they don't date separately. That's usually what the swinging is. You do things together, and there's not sort of outside things. Now, having said all this, we do have friends and that consider themselves as swingers or libertines or in the lifestyle, but we have, we have strong emotional relationships with them.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a
That's interesting, right? So they may express themselves, or we may interact with them on a sexual level, but yet we still have an ongoing emotional connection.
Yeah, well, for sure. Like, we were just at a birthday this weekend, and we've seen some friends that we haven't seen in a long time, and we see them just as friends and hang out. And we also see them as lovers and, do more sexual things. And they love us. Like, when they saw us, it was so amazing. Like, we haven't seen them in a while. And it was like, they told us how much they loved us and missed us and just wanted to spend all that time with us. So
that sounds very polyamorous.
It does, but their dynamic is very different than ours.
They announce themselves as swingers and not polyamorous.
They definitely do. And they would say, then they only do things together.
Yeah, but they also would say that they do open relate. They engage in open relating.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of the label.
Exactly. So that's swinging.
But it's interesting, right? So here we are with them. We have a strong emotional connection with them, but our sexual interaction with them is swinging. When do we know when it's swinging and when it is polyamorous? Is it simply the demonstration of the sexual physical part, or is it the emotional component? How do we know where we're at when we're in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still these labels, are still identities. So we had this conversation earlier today. It's like, I still identify as polyamorous, even though some of the activities we engage in are more swinger in nature. Like, if we do things together, I consider that swinging versus dating other people. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if it matters, as long as you know and everybody you interact with knows, what the deal is, sort of thing. I don't know.
It's interesting too, the idea that the swinging, if it is looked at really as a physical sexual thing, how it might feel safer for some couples. The most threatening part would be, well, what happens if they fall in love with somebody else? What happens if there's like a strong emotional connection between them? Whereas being swinging, it says, well, we are together and then we go do this thing together. And it's usually just limited to that activity. It's physical, sexual, and it seems for some people more secure.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Some people choose this because they don't want to have that, what's considered a threat to the relationship. So that's swinging. And then in that same quadrant falls open relationships and open marriage. But what the difference is between, swinging and open relationships or an open marriage, to me, is that you might have outside relationships from your other relationship. Like, you may have a relationship you may be coupled with someone, but you also have other individual relationships on your own. So you date other people, I date other people,
But but in swinging, it's generally that we would do that stuff together.
Yeah.
Being an open relationship, open marriage, we might date other people separately while still being in a relationship together.
Yeah, and then people go, oh, but what's an open relationship versus polyamory? So polyamory, I think, is where you sort of cross over the line into the polyamorous side and lower emotional exclusivity. I think the difference for me between an open relationship and any of the forms of polyamory is that you might be in an open relationship, you might be limiting a little bit more your emotional connections, where you're not necessarily in love with people or establishing long-term committed relationships. But having said that, also, not true for some people. So again, definition. So what is your definition of this? So following the different types of polyamory. So there's basically 3 different types of polyamory.
Tell us. Well,
I think I've been talking a lot, so
okay.
I'd love for you to talk about the main 3.
Well, it said there's hierarchy, right? There's a certain hierarchical polyamory where you may have, primary partners, which many people object to, and then secondary, tertiary partners, which really doesn't have a good connotation these days. People take exception to having this kind of class system. They're wanting to avoid that, but they're whether you name it or put that label to it, it may still exist regardless, right? So we are in a hierarchical relationship, and many times we say to each other, well, we're in this relationship and we have strong emotional investments in each other, and when we plan on dating together otherwise, we will have a certain level of consideration for the other person. So we will say, well, I want to date Jessica on Wednesday, fine, but I might say in consideration to you, well, how do you feel about Wednesday? Do we have anything planned? And if not, I'm going to go on a date with,
Yeah.
So there's a certain consideration for the other person because they are of strong emotional importance, significant that way. Yeah,
and I think people in the hierarchical polyamorous relationships, there's this idea of ranking, like somebody's more important than others. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes those situationally, they have to be, like if you're cohabitating and you have to make other arrangements, if you have kids and that sort of thing. But I think there are ways of being like I would say we're more semi-hierarchical, moving towards non-hierarchical, because I think that we involve others in decision makings. If we have agreements in place that we ensure that all of our partners are consenting to that type of relationship. So you're not doing that couples privilege thing. But I think because we cohabitate, it's really hard to avoid, sometimes in different places, we're in Toronto right now, that it's hard to avoid having some sort of hierarchy in play.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. How could we be cohabitating and not have that hierarchy? I don't know the answer. It's rhetorical, but maybe our viewers have ideas about that as well.
Yeah.
How do you avoid the hierarchy when you are nesting partners?
Yeah.
Yeah. The next major one in the scheme would be non-hierarchical.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, and then
solo.
Solo.
Yeah, solo polyamory. So solo polyamory, I think the difference between the two non and regular hierarchical is that you're engaging in multiple sexual or emotional relationships, but without the goal of partnering or entering into a formal arrangement with somebody.
That relationship escalator that we always talk about.
The relationship escalator. It
doesn't exist there. You're not looking. Your aim is not necessarily looking to couple or create these other relationships. You're kind of open to being by yourself with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be polyamorous and not solo and not go on the relationship escalator. Like I would say that we're not going on the emotional escalator. We've gone to a certain.
Gotten there though?
We've gone to a certain level, but maybe not all the way.
But what more could there be? I mean, where else could we go in our polyamorous relationship? What would be
marriage, kids, exclusivity. That would be, to me, the exclusivity part. That's the part we don't have on the relationship escalator.
Exclusivity.
Yeah.
Could we do it without the exclusivity? Could it exist theoretically?
I don't think you're on the relationship escalator then. The relationship escalator, I think, has a very particular trajectory, and part of it is exclusivity.
Not sure about that.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree.
Well, no, but because I was working with a couple, and they did not have any type of exclusivity, but they were married. They decided to take their relationship from being polyamorous open to continuing to be polyamorous open, but they married.
Yeah, that's fine. You can be married and polyamorous. I'm not saying you can't, but I don't think that you've gone to a certain level on the relationship escalator, but you're not. It's not at the exclusion of others. To me, the relationship escalator is exclusivity, have kids, end of story. You're only with one person in a traditional, the traditional relationship escalator, as it's called.
Fair enough.
Okay. So the other one we sort of added in is friends with benefits. Yeah. And I think the reason we added it is because it's not in polysecure, is that it kind of falls into this lower quadrant, but it's not totally polyamory. It's not totally it has, and for different people it can mean different things.
So the friend part would be the amorous part, right? Because we're not just doing random hookups or casual stuff like that without any kind of emotional involvement. We have an ongoing relationship. We care for the other person. They care for us. We're friends. And we have the benefits. So we are having a sexual expression, but we're without the expectation of it being exclusive. Right? So it's low sexual exclusivity.
Yes.
Right? Because you may have other friends with benefits, as
Yes.
I may, and that works quite well there.
Yeah, but I think this is one where definitions are super important. Like I had a client, we were talking about this, and someone that they were with said they wanted to be friends with benefits. And he was like, well, what does that mean to you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because your friends can be like the closest people in the world to you. So to you, a friend with benefit might be the closest relationship you've ever had with somebody intimately. You might love them and that sort of thing. You just don't want the level of commitment. But it's not relationship anarchy either. I think it's a little different.
But it's so important to define that because as you were saying, I was thinking about the idea of, oh, well, friends wouldn't do that to friends. Well, what do friends do with friends, right? Especially when they're friends with benefits. So like, can we define it so that we know what the expectations are, what there is at play so that we're not disappointed or we're not, doing something that we thought that the other person was on board with, right? So it's important to be able to talk about that and have similar understanding so we know what we're getting to.
Yeah, well, exactly. Because alternatively, like friends with benefits could also be a very light relationship. So it could be that, I just see you once in a while and we have sex, but there's no other emotional attachment. So that one can float around, I think, in different parts of that whole diagram, but mostly somewhere over on the right-hand side.
It's interesting. I was speaking about this. I think about some relationships and maybe they start off one way, but then they morph into something else. And it happens rather organically. It's wonderful. But do we ever stop to announce it? Do we ever say, hey, you know what? We started off as friends with benefits, but I've been really catching feelings for you. And I think you're catching them for me. We're hanging out a lot more. And all of a sudden, I feel like we kind of, morphed into more than just friends with benefits. Fine, that's great. But do we ever announce it? Do we ever say, yeah, you know what? You're right. I feel that way too. And now the way I feel about you might have changed. And do we change the way we announce ourselves? Do we change the way we perceive ourselves? Is that information we should be sharing? Is it information that we should be having as a dialogue with each other?
Yeah, and with our other partners. If you have other relationships and say you're in a situation where you're in an open marriage or an open relationship and your agreement is that you're only going to have friends with benefits and your definition of friends with benefits is lower emotional connections, and then you catch feelings for someone. This is where some people get into difficult times, right? They're like, oh, I'm starting to fall in love with my friend with benefits. And that's when, agreements and communication and check-ins on what you want are so important.
The agreement not to fall in love with somebody.
Not that agreement. That's like a rule people make that you just can't keep, I think.
I don't know how you would be able to enforce that.
No, you can't.
In a box.
You can't. But if you do find you're in a situation where you're in an open relationship and you have partners that you begin to grow close with, and it was meant to be not strong emotional connections, that's the point in which you have to talk to your partner and say, keep the dialogue open in terms of what's going on and what can we do to sort of still value, have quality time and that sort of thing in our relationship. So.
There's not time for us to speak about it now, but maybe it is something we could address later on. The idea of, we go from just now, the example is that we're in a friends with benefits situation and we start to enjoy each other's company more and more, and it kind of organically goes into something else. But what about on the other side of that? What about when we do have some type of, more involved relationship when we're wanting less of it? How do we announce when we're wanting to go into the de-escalator?
Yeah, de-escalating.
How do we de-escalate with love, support, and acceptance on both sides, right? Because at first it might be like, wow, like you're not wanting to be this way with me anymore. I might be tempted to take it as a rejection of some sort or think that I'm not insufficient, I'm not enough of this or that. How can we have these conversations and say, well, it seems quite understandable that we might feel one way at one point, and then our needs, our values, our desires change, and it's not necessarily a rejection of the other person. It's simply that we are wanting to revise the situation. How can we have those type of difficult conversations as well?
Exactly. Those are super important. Yeah. Okay. And not quietly quitting, which is a term I don't want to get into definite. Quietly quitting is
we need
you
to
don't
speak
want to
about
do
that as well. No, we don't want to do that.
I'm going to sneeze. Okay. So we didn't really touch on relationship anarchy, but basically that is where you sort of break down like all the sort of you dismantle hierarchies completely, sexually and romantically. So the idea, relationship anarchists are not making distinctions between importance between different friends and lovers. So friends, people that you are sexual with or not, and others. So anyways, that's relationship anarchy. So then we go into the top corner, which I think we'll go through really quickly because I do want to get to those questions.
Polyintimates?
Yeah, so polyintimates. Polyintimates and polyamorous and asexual. So in this way, there's lower emotional exclusivity, but there's also higher sexual exclusivity, and it's different. I mean, you say asexual and that gets confusing, but let's start with polyintimates.
Okay.
So you have a polyintimate relationship.
I do. Yeah, I have a relationship with someone who's very close to emotionally, but we are no longer sexually expressing our love for each other. And it is very intimate. So you know that they hold a space in my heart, and they are your metamor in that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Metamor being anybody?
Anybody? Bueller? Put in the comments.
So the person that I'm involved with, one over on that side, would be your polyamor, your metamor.
Yes.
I almost didn't get that.
Partners of your partner. So.
Partners of your partner. Good.
Yeah. So that's polyintimate. So you might have, they might be non-sexual partners, and you might have other levels of involvement, you know. And then there's polyamorous and asexual. So these are, asexual is when you do not experience sexual attraction, but you may want to be romantically involved with someone.
Right,
so you may have multiple romantic, someone put it in.
Right, perfect. The person you're involved with,
their primary, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so being asexual does not, because you're not sexually expressing yourself physically, does not exclude your idea of being romantically or emotionally involved with this person.
Exactly. So that's all of them. The good news is we have this diagram, not the definitions, but the diagram, and we have the worksheet this week. So if you drop the word work in the comments, you'll get the worksheet, which has this and the questions, which we're going to talk about. So yeah, so let's talk about the questions to determine what style or identity of non-monogamy is for you.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, the question for me is like, why do I want to be polyamorous?
Yeah, non-monogamous.
Polyamorous, non-monogamous, open relating, friends with benefits, whatever you're going to call it. What are you going to call it? Where are you going to be? Swinging?
Well, what makes me want, like, what is my motive behind it? So that's the question. Like, what are you trying to get out of
in being
non-monogamous? Yeah. So this is going to help you define what style you want is, because what your motive is will tell you what you're trying to get out of it, and so that may help define where you fit in it. So what do you hope to gain?
So am I looking for like sexual contact? Am I looking for emotional intimacy?
Yes.
Am I looking for things of that nature? And that'll kind of inform me into that.
Yeah. That's question number one.
So we'd ask ourselves that as individuals, but then might we ask that as a couple?
Yes, we're going to get to that. But I think it's important first to do your own work inside, because you need to decide for yourself. Because then if you make it a joint decision, you may not be coming in with your own
for sure.
your idea of what you want. So with any of these things, any of these questions and stuff you ask, usually it's important to do your own inner reflection first, and then talk to your partners, because you may have partners at this point, about how this might fit with what they're looking for, and then define your relationship accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Because often, I think whether we're conscious of it or not, we may want to please the other person. So we respond from their offerings, right? And they say they want this, and we're like, okay, like I'll find my way to that.
Yeah.
Whereas it might not necessarily be what's really of our own desire.
Yeah.
So if we can find out from ourselves first, then we can be more informed and share that and find out where do we fit on this and where do we have common interests.
Yeah. I mean, you may come to this idea of being non-monogamous from a monogamous relationship or new relationship like we did, right? Like we came to kind of this idea together. But then I think what was awesome about being with you is you're so easy to talk to and be open with, that we could kind of openly discuss these things without feeling like you're being coerced or influenced in any way. But of course I did my own inner reflection for sure and asked myself these questions, even if it wasn't consciously. But if I had to do it again, I would definitely do it more consciously.
Yeah, I wasn't conscious of it. I just thought it would be fun to do that, and you seemed like fun, and yeah, let's go at it. But no, I did not stop to consider the implications or what it was going to result in.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. But it's interesting too, because we did that rather early in our relationship. We weren't really on much of an escalator yet,
Mhm.
it seemed. But it would have been much different had we been together for a couple of years or had children or all of these other
Yeah.
investments.
Yeah, and I think that's where it becomes hard for a lot of people. They're like, oh, they have this idea, they want to open a relationship, and they're like, okay, we've been living now, now you have to kind of unpack and from that type of relationship and how you move towards non-monogamy. It's a little bit of a harder task, and definitely people have issues, which is why some of these questions are super helpful, but also getting help if you need it.
Well, for sure.
Okay, so number one was what makes me want to be non-monogamous? Like, what's our motive? What I hope to gain? What am I excited about?
Yeah.
I love that. Let's always get, what are you really excited about? Because this will kind of also form what it is that you want in a non-monogamous relationship, right? Like, what gets me excited? Like, do I want to go to clubs and have sex with other people? Do I want to have more friends and people that I can relate to on an ongoing basis? Do I want to just have random hookups or do I want to do kinky things and outside of my relationship? Like, there's so many opportunities.
It's amazing how time
It's exciting.
I love how all your answers are physical or sexual. And me, I was thinking about the emotional
I said
benefits.
emotional. I said the emotional.
I'm gonna have to roll back the tape. We'll ask the producers. No, I was thinking about the possible benefits of having another person to share and love and be loved by and all those wonderful things.
Activity partners. Well, one of my partners that I met, we are now just friends just because of the situation. But we love to talk about business. So you used to joke and say, we have this thing where, have a date and it's like, you should have sex first before you eat or get into anything, because if you don't, you might never get to it, or you might get uncomfortable, or you might get involved in something.
Or if you have sex first, then you might have a chance of having it a second time.
Oh, yeah.
In the evening. Yeah.
But we always used to get together, and if we hadn't seen each other in a while, we would sit on the couch, have a drink, and then like chat about business and stuff like that. So we have an ongoing relationship. I just messaged him the other day, and he helped me with some stuff.
Great
you know what I mean? So.
I couldn't ask for a nicer metaphor.
Yes. So what are you excited about? So situations or opportunities.
Yeah.
So number 3.
There's so much to say about those opportunities. Yeah. So number 3, what am I worried about? The fear that might stop me from entering into these different areas, right? What might stop the exploration?
Yeah. Am I going to be jealous?
Sure.
Like, what if I see my partner? What if what if they like the other person more, or
they don't like, for sure.
What if they leave me? Or like, these are the things that's good to know in advance, because then you can build, agreements around this on how you might be reassured, for example, that sort of thing.
Yeah, good question. Yeah. Another question we might ask ourselves is, how emotionally exclusive would I like to be? Or would I like my partner to be?
Yes. Yeah. So we talked a bit about that in the quadrant. So do I want to have one additional relationship or partner? How emotionally close do I want to get to them? Do I want to just see them once in a while? You know what I mean? Do I want to be really close? Do I want to be just friends? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because again, for me, and I think I bring this up quite often, I know I do, about how it might be easier to ask for sexual, physical relations to be how they're going to be compared to the emotional part. So I might say, well, I'd like to be physical with you, sexual, but I don't do intercourse, or I don't do this, I don't do oral sex, or I don't do anal sex, or whatever it might be. It's easy to talk about the physical things, but how do I say to you, I'm really the kind of guy that is like a slow burn, and I really need to have an emotional connection first. I'm looking for love. And if I say I'm looking for love in whatever capacity, does that scare people? Is that more threatening than the physical part? Well, you're going to sleep with somebody, so you sleep with them. For many people, it's much more difficult to announce their emotional preferences.
Yeah. So what are you excited about? I love this answer here from Facebook user that I'll see, I guess, when I go into the comments. I get excited about passion. Oh, yeah, passion.
Well, that's so interesting, right? So, the first 18 months, 16 months, whatever it is, the honeymoon phase, the so-called honeymoon phase, there's a lot of passion, right? And then many people say, well, it kind of falls off after that, try as we might. Whereas that new relationship energy, well, that's all it's about, right? It's that passion. You're getting to know a person that's new, it's exciting. It might be a way of re-stimulating that. And from that, you might actually take some of that feeling and then bring it back to your other relationship and re-inject that passion in there.
Yeah.
It's not something that ever has to be extinguished. It can be brought forward.
Yeah, and I think we have that.
Sure do.
We sure do. So number 5 is, how sexually exclusive do I want to be? So do I want to keep the number of sexual partners limited? Do I want to have it more open? Do I
Should
want
it
to?
be during certain times or certain events or?
Yeah. So that's sexual exclusivity. So, and then once you've answered those questions, there's a few others that, you might want to think about. And these are all in the worksheet.
There's always more to think about.
Always more to think about. But we're trying to make it simple. People can start. So what are the next steps? So this is where it comes to it. What are the next steps to make this a reality and to ensure everybody's on the same page?
It starts with communication, right? So we're going to have these conversations, right?
Yes.
So like you said, we'll start with ourselves. We'll figure out what it is we're wanting and what we're not wanting. And then once we've got that, hopefully our partner or partners are also doing that. And then we can come and say, well, let's talk about what it is we're wanting.
Yeah. So
can we have these organic conversations, or should it be really formal? How does it go? Like, how do we have these conversations?
I mean, there might be timing, tone, turf, and timing, as I say. It's good to plan when you're going to have them, and make sure people are open to having those conversations. So, and it's good to prepare too. Like, what is it? If this is a big announcement that, oh, I want to be non-monogamous and this is how I want to do it, then that's something I think you definitely have to plan for. And you want to make sure that your partner is, if you're in a monogamous relationship, is prepared for it, and you do it in a way that's comfortable and reassuring and all those things. You know what I mean? So you have to figure out what kinds of conversations you might have to have and then start planning for it.
Sure. By this time, hopefully you've been taking the temperature, right?
Yeah. You're
getting a feel of whether this person is going to be open to these ideas, or are they really adamant about certain things?
Yeah. What's interesting, like, I know there's lots of people in the group, and maybe you're watching today, that tell me that they've been talking about opening a relationship for years. That, they're in a monogamous relationship, maybe they're married, maybe have kids, and they've been talking for years, but they've never taken action. And so even if you have been talking about it for a long time, actually making the thing and saying, okay, let's do it. Okay, then you have to get into the next thing, which is like, okay, if we're going to do this, what types of agreements do we need in place? Like, how are we going to protect ourselves, protect the environment, our relationship?
Those conversations about parameters, about agreements, about all those things will often make us feel more secure, because we'll have clarity about it. We'll have understandings. We'll have these agreements that say, yes, we're going to do this, and we're both on board with it. We're consented to do it. We understand the implications as best as we can, and therefore we'll be able to open it up. Whereas in the past, we might have been a little bit reluctant to do so because we did not have these conversations. What happens if I introduce this idea and they are not wanting it? What happens if they do want it? So
exactly,
we'll have to communicate that.
Okay. And then finally, what systems we need to have in place to ensure things go smoothly, like, for example, what kinds of check-ins and that sort of thing. So it's a lot. And I think we skirted over it quite a bit.
Yeah. It seems like a lot, but the good part is that we do it on a daily basis. Hopefully we get to communicate with each other and we find out where we're at. It seems like a lot at first, but actually we're doing it most of the time anyway. We're already having our thoughts and our feelings about this. Now we're just asking, how can we identify it and then communicate it?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you do need help or you've started and struggling, we've got you. We have our Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery group program, which starts this month.
Yeah.
So includes all these things and more. So basically we put together all the tools and all the things you need to set yourself up for success, give you the step-by-step and exact process to make sure you have epic open relationship like ours, epic open or polyamorous relationship. So, you want to create deep connection, you want to have pleasure and satisfaction, and, reduce the things like jealousy and insecurity. So this slide has a picture of like the various things that are included in the program. But I think the biggest part is like what you put in and support we give you along the way.
Agreed.
So don't forget that today's secret word is work. And here's some other ways to get in touch with us. So you can always book a free call with us to talk about what's going on with your relationship, and we'll make sure that you get some next steps, mastery for polyamory mastery, and then work to get your worksheet today. Phew, that was a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did it in under 45 minutes. Excellent.
Yeah, so we'll make sure we drop all those links in the chat. And thank you for watching, those who are live and those who are watching the replay. And those are joining us from LinkedIn today.
Yeah,
So
wow.
yeah, it was
Welcome.
first time broadcasting there. So thanks so much. And we will see you next Monday at 11 a.m.
Bye.
Bye.